Hello, hello. How are you? I am Mayor Watt. That's my site, ohmTown.com. It is a news aggregator, and that's what powers the ohmTown Daily News Show. It used to be on at 6, now it's on at 11, runs until midnight. Maybe I'll hang out afterwards, I'm really not sure. But here's the show. I've already selected about 20 articles. It averages somewhere between 15 and 20. And I go through this hour-long show talking about some articles that get thrown into these 6 categories: create, news, education, entertainment, social, and technology. There's about 100 episodes now that are 103 or so that are done. They are on YouTube for longer term backup. There's a podcast called ohmTown. You can get it on Spotify and on Google Play and on Apple Podcasts. Not all of them are actually over in the Apple Podcasts, so yeah, I'm getting there. Today's episode is for 4/13/2022. That just happens to be the episode number as well. In the podcast, it'll end up being somewhere around 104. At any rate, let's get into this. The very first article that I talk about today, or that I'm going to talk about today, is Biden says the 70% of March's record inflation was driven by Putin's price hike in gasoline. And this is all because of apparently what's going on between basically Russia invading Ukraine. I still don't see it that way. It says here, Biden said 70% of the price increases in March were because of Putin's price hike in gasoline. The U.S. Department of Labor reports said gas prices went up 18.3% in March after rising 6.6% in February. Biden said sales of E15 ethanol blended gas, 10 cents cheaper than other gas, will be allowed in the U.S. Now, to me, if you look at all of the numbers that are associated with all of the shenanigans that are going on right now, you'll see that although oil has increased in price, these gas companies are still making record profits while raising prices. Well, if you're keeping the margins the same and you're raising prices and your gas, your raw materials, the oil is costing more, it's kind of hard to have record profits, stunningly record profits, not just record profits, while we have inflation. So something weird is going on. I've never been able to get down to the core of this, but I am not in this sector. I just have a general understanding of the business machinations that take place. There are always people that are even more focused. I have yet to be walked through how you can have record profits, increased costs, inflation, and a reduction in consumption, and still have record profits. This article is over at businessinsider.com, and it's written by Kate Duffy, and goes into greater detail about this 70% is borne by Putin's aggression in Ukraine. I think that it is just happy blaming on something as a distraction from profiteering. But that may be just me, but I don't see it. So let's continue on the next article. And all of these links will be in the show notes over on YouTube and in the podcast. I typically don't put them in the VODs simply because you can get them when you watch the VOD, and the VODs are only there for 14 days. I need that counter right there to keep moving up. Oh, wait, the other way. Go that way, to 100%. So if you are in my chat, please follow if you haven't already followed me. That would be great. I need that number to keep going up, and I'm not running around screaming the benefits of ohmTown. But it's a great news aggregator. I use it all day long to keep me informed of what's going on around the world. So I think that it does a great service. But that's not what this is all about. This is all about the news that's aggregated and me talking about it and interacting. So if you have questions or comments or something, then you can get in touch with me and we can talk about it. This next article is over in the Word in Tech. And this section is called Techscape. Will the video game industry ever confront its carbon footprint? It says here in this week's newsletter, from the environmental impact of servers and plastic packaging down to the energy our PCs and consoles consume, the sector can no longer afford to play around. When a company tries to cut its carbon footprint, how far should it cast the net? Is it responsible for the choices of its consumer or customers? What if it sells something that doesn't have a carbon footprint at all until the second it's used? I'm stuck with this because it's really not end users. It's not the consumers that are really impacting the climate at the level that there are certain things like waste, plastic waste, where it is a lot of stuff being thrown out. But we need to be able to recycle. And so the materials that we are using should be recyclable materials. And then, enforce some recycling. I mean, we have here in the States, at least all over the place, we have specially labeled containers for recycling materials. We just have to, we have to do it. As for manufacturers, the carbon footprint of manufacturers, of industrial processes, that, as far as I recall, far outstrips what consumers do when they purchase a PC or something like that. It pales in comparison to the industrial side of things. And as for everybody doing their part, that's great. Everybody should do their part, but I don't know how far down the line you want to go with carbon footprint issues. This here is an article over at theguardian.com by Alex Hearn. I'm happy to discuss this kind of stuff. I'm all for getting off the grid, going solar power or wind power or geothermal. Heck, even nuclear, once the technology reaches a point where it's reducing the amount of waste that can happen and the safety of it. I don't want another Chernobyl, but the amount of energy that can be created based on nuclear energy is pretty tremendous, as long as we have a safer way of dealing with its waste. That said, I think that it's still weird that that nuclear energy is basically a steam engine. All this high tech, and it's basically generating steam to turn a turbine. There's so much waste in the conversion of nuclear energy into steam, which turns a mechanical turbine. But anyway, this article goes into greater detail about. It says here about the carbon footprint issue. For some companies flush with cash, the answer is easy enough. Microsoft, for instance, has committed to becoming carbon negative by 2030 and ultimately removing from the environment all the carbon it has ever emitted by 2050. In that accounting, it's even accepting the cost of downstream use of its products. If you've powered an Xbox on a diesel generator or charged a Zune using coal power, Microsoft will offset those emissions. Yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to be enumerated in a way that makes sense. I think it's more of an accounting thing. Throw enough money at it and you're, quote unquote, removing or shrinking your carbon footprint. I don't necessarily agree with that. We need to do more recycling. We need to scrub the air from manufacturing plants. And this is all in the US. You're not going to have any influence on foreign countries that are pumping out more industrial waste because they're going through their industrial era, just like the US did. So, yeah, help guide them so that they don't make the same mistakes we did, and you can mitigate that carbon footprint at the source because it's more of the industrial side than just end users. I'm going to go on to the next article. This next article is in the Word in Tech. That's a channel talking about technology. Young and depressed, try Wobot, the rise of mental health chatbots in the United States. And this really applies to anybody. If you have access to an artificial intelligence or a machine learning system, and if Wobot is available to you, it doesn't have to be a health chatbot just in the U.S. High school sophomore from Harrisburg, North Carolina, was overwhelmed with schoolwork, never mind the uncertainty of living in a pandemic that has dragged on for 2 long years, and despite the challenges, she never turned to her school counselor or sought out a therapist. So let's click this link. It takes us over to The Guardian. And let's see. The article is written by, I'll have to log in again. I'll continue on with something else. But anyway, there are now bots that you can interact with that acts like a kind of a soft form of therapy. And it's something that has been continuing. This is an article over at The Guardian by Mark Carelieber. This is something that's going to keep on happening. It's basically an expert system that reacts to the conversations that are taking place within the bot's repertoire of communication. You might be able to trick it. You might be able to get it to do something or say something out of band, but normally there's some type of monitoring taking place to assist in not doing something like what happened with chatbots via Twitter. And like it says here, critics worry they're a band-aid solution unsupported by evidence. Yeah, I mean, they're new, and like anything new, people freak out about it. But we're going to have to try it and see what goes on with it. Let's see. This is going to be another issue because I'm not logged in, and because of the way that I've got things set up, I don't want to expose my login. But anyway, this next article is in the Word in Tech. You can go and check it out. And but I can do a little summary of this. It says here, the Twitter shareholder Elon Musk is being sued for failing to disclose that he had bought a substantial stake in the company. In a previous episode, I spoke of this because there is a certain break that the SEC requires you to file a document notifying shareholders that you've purchased 5% of a stake in a publicly traded company. And it's so that stakeholders have the ability to address the possible takeover of a company. Well, Elon Musk purchased 9.2% in relative short amount of time without notifying anybody, and then subsequently filed the paperwork after the fact, saving almost $200 million, I think it was, or maybe $150 million. And also, in my opinion, completely hobbling anybody's ability to purchase Twitter. If somebody wanted to come on board and purchase Twitter right now and take it private, or purchase it and still trade it publicly, the premium on the shares are gone, because nobody is going to want to, at least in my opinion, nobody's going to want to take the risk of dealing with Elon Musk saying or doing something with a controlling share, and being offered a board position. He bowed out of taking that board position, but the fact of the matter is now he's a stakeholder of 9.2%. There's been issues where a statement is made and it's affected the stock price of Tesla, because he said that it was going to be taken private, and then it didn't happen. So to me, when you're the richest person on the planet, you can't make these statements willy-nilly, because it will move the needle one way or another. So in this case, the moment that I heard that there wasn't any other filings and it was just out of the blue, I figured lawsuits were gonna pop up out of nowhere. That said, I also don't think that people, if everything was positive, if everybody was a winner in this, nobody would have said anything about this 5%. But it actually hindered some investors from capitalizing on it. So here you go, lawsuit. But if everything was great and everybody was coming out positive on the other side, nobody would be complaining. So I'm going to click this link. It takes us over to the Guardian. But again, I would have to sign in to get more into this. But you can go over and read it when you get a chance. You can follow that link. So the next article is Polestar brings a cheaper single motor Polestar 2 to the US. So I'm going to show you this interesting vehicle here. So in 2020, we got our first drive in the then new Polestar 2, an electric fastback sedan from a startup automaker owned by Volvo and Geely. I've never seen that before. The car had a great interior and some nifty infotainment features courtesy of Google's Android Automotive OS. At launch, there was just one powertrain option, a dual motor all-wheel drive setup with a combined 408 horsepower, combined with a 78 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery. But the company has now added a second, cheaper Polestar 2 to its US lineup. The new option makes do with just a single electric motor that powers the front wheels. Depending on where you are, would never purchase a vehicle that doesn't have all-wheel drive. Polestar turned up the power on the motor compared to the otherwise identical units you'd find if you dissected an all-wheel drive Polestar 2, and now generates 231 horsepower, although it still makes an identical 243 pounds of so let's click this and take you over there. So this is over at Ars Technica. It's written by Jonathan M. Gitlin. And there's the vehicle right there. So it looks kind of like a what is it called? Oh my goodness. Trying to make sure that it's kind of like the Land Rover, right? And yeah, the Land Rover Sport kind of has that styling to it, but the back is it's more like a fastback style, and that's even how it's the description of it is electric fastback. So if you've ever seen like an old school Mustang fastback, it has this tapered end that ends at the back of the car. And I mean, it's pretty neat looking. And at 408 horsepower, and all-wheel drive, dual motor. I mean, I think that it's a great looking car. I'm not sure about charging. It says that the Polestar 2 takes 7 seconds to get from 0 to 60. And says skipping on a second motor saves some money at $46,000 before tax incentives. The single motor is $4,000 cheaper than the all-wheel drive version. If I was going to purchase this car, I would purchase it with all-wheel drive and that second motor. Because the Polestar 2 only gets to 231 horsepower and loses all-wheel drive. You'd find if you dissected an all-wheel drive Polestar 2. I thought it said it only was front-wheel drive. Okay, let's continue on to the next article. Says here, Gran Turismo 7 will rejigger its game economy after backlash. So it says here, when Gran Turismo 7 launched earlier this month, it was no surprise that the game's economy was not exactly forgiving, but displeasure among players boiled over a couple of weeks later after a bungled update took down the game servers and therefore basically the entire game for more than a day. Now the head of Polyphony Digital has published a post at the PlayStation blog to apologize to players and let them know the studio has been listening. Let's click this link. It takes us over to Ars Technica as well. Every existing player will also get 1 million in-game credits. I mean, that's... so this article is over at Ars Technica, and it's written by Jonathan M. Gitlin. And although this type of response tends to take place in mobile games where something happens and you get an incentive, that incentive gets consumed pretty quickly because it's just a mobile game and has microtransactions. But flooding the economy with every player getting 1 million in-game credits, and then if you're new, you don't get that incentive, so you're basically hobbled if you're new and you're still playing catch up to an economy that has already been flooded with an extra 1 million credits per user. It's interesting. It says players will now be able to accumulate 100 million credits as opposed to just 20 million credits, which may come as welcome news to those busy exploiting the game with remote play PC scripts to earn credits. I mean, if you know that kind of stuff exists, I guess like in my area of business and technology, you build a better mousetrap and better mice show up. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Okay, well, anyway, you can go over to Ars Technica and read more about it. And if you are in the Gran Turismo 7 ecosystem, welcome to an extra 1 million in-game credits. So let's continue on. The next article is over in the 4-Wheel Tech channel as well. Affordable electric cars coming in 2027 from new GM Honda project. On Tuesday, General Motors and Honda announced that the two companies are working together on a new range of affordable electric vehicles. The two manufacturers will develop new architecture that uses GM's new Ultium battery platform for North America, South America, and China. Production of the first vehicles by both companies should begin in 2027. So, well, it's out there on the horizon. I would take any of this with a grain of salt because we're talking about 5 years in the future and talking about sub $30,000 EVs for North America. I'll see it when it shows up in the stores. Because saying that you're going to do it 5 years out and the reality of it actually happening, two different animals. It says GM has been slightly less tight-lipped as it has revealed a U.S. market EV that will be a crossover that's smaller and cheaper than next year's $30,000 Equinox EV. Quote, our collaboration with Honda and the continuing development of Ultium are the foundation of this project, utilizing our global scale to enable a lower cost foundation for this new series of EVs for millions of customers. Well, I think that it's great, but we need chargers, we need faster charging, we need the ability to replace them without us having to go into without us having to go in and get a $20,000 loan to replace the batteries. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. When what really should be happening is we should be treating these EVs just like regular cars and have a system in place where we can pull out a standardized battery pack that is designed with the tech in mind so that we get X amount of mileage, just like a gas vehicle. And we can put a new battery in and take a new battery out in less than 5 minutes and not have to worry about finding a charging station or anything really. I mean, if we want to plug it in at home, then great, but not everybody has a charging system laying around, and they're not as pervasive as futurists hope. So we have issues with this system. So let's keep on working, everybody, on getting some standardized capabilities. So let's continue on. The next article is dealership markups are getting crazy. So this site is tracking them. This is in the Four Wheel Tech channel. It says here, if there's anything harder to buy right now than a new PlayStation 5 or a graphics card, it's probably a new car, truck, or SUV. They've reported about chip shortages, COVID shutdown, shipping congestion, and now Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You got to throw that in there. In the U.S., the vast majority of car buyers are not accustomed to ordering vehicles from an OEM through a dealership, instead preferring the convenience of taking a car home from the lot. So this was written about once before, and it's over at the Ars Technica site written by Jonathan M. Gitlin. This was an older article, but it was edited in some way. And I wanted to talk about it briefly because yet again, I'm seeing cars and being told about cars where the markup is $20,000 higher than retail. With inflation still pressing down on us, we're going to continue to see higher than market price. I keep saying it as market pricing, but market pricing is what it is based on the market. But we're seeing cars priced $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 higher than the MSRP. And they're lacking chips. They're not ready to run vehicles. They're not whole vehicles. You're basically buying a car that doesn't have a feature set because the chips aren't there. So I'm going to continue on. You can follow that link and read it at your leisure. But this one was interesting because my aggregator grabbed this and threw it into Four Wheel Tech. This synthetic fuel startup just got $75 million from Porsche. So in 2021, Porsche announced that it was starting to work with synthetic fuels. The company is rather proud that so many of its cars it has built over the decades are still on the road, and recognizes that the only way to maintain that is in an increasingly climate-blighted future will be with synthetic gasoline that's made with carbon sucked from the air. In September last year, the Haru Oni pilot plant, built for that purpose, broke ground in Punta Arenas in Chile. That plant was funded in part by Porsche as well as Siemens Energy and ExxonMobil, but is being built and will be operated by a Chilean startup called HIF Global. On Wednesday, Porsche announced that it was investing $75 million to buy a 12.5% stake in the startup, which seems like it would be a pretty cheap purchase for solidifying a synthetic fuel plant, the cost of which has to be pretty tremendous, but not like the purchasing of the product. The e-fuel making process at Haruoni starts by capturing CO2 from the air and using wind power to electrolyze water into hydrogen and oxygen. The carbon and hydrogen are used to synthesize methanol, and methanol is then turned into longer hydrocarbons using ExxonMobil's methanol to gasoline process. So this is over at Ars Technica as well. Again, articles written by Jonathan M. Gitlin. And although this is not, these two articles are not exactly from the last 24 hours, I wanted to kind of pile a bunch of articles into a news show and start maybe thinking about having shows each day that are more focused on a particular topic. But if you go over to this, if you follow this link from chat or from the show notes, you'll be able to read more about the synthetic fuel startup that got money from Porsche. So this next article is over in the Mobile channel, hampered by scientism. Researcher examines the history of American social science. This is one of the three main topics that I kind of blend into ohmTown and the Daily News Show, and probably all of the shows that I'm going to be part of, which is business, technology, and society. Pardon me one second. Early in the Cold War era, social sciences were criticized for not being really scientific, for being ideological and political in ways that may seem to have been disguised as science, says Mark Solovey, a professor in the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the University of Toronto. Let's click this link. So I'm very interested in sociological forces and the impact of business and technology on society and society's influence on business and tech. So it's kind of like this triad of influencers on each other. You really can't, I won't go down this road. And this article is over at phys.org, and it's written by Cynthia McDonald from University of Toronto. That was weird. I don't know if I got dropped. I'm sorry, one second. That's really weird. Okay. Well, I was recording, so I'll have my copy of it. I'll just have to cut out what might have been skipped. It's kind of weird what just happened. Anyway, I was streaming just fine, but Twitch is saying that I'm not. Well, at any rate, this researcher examines the history of American social science and goes into greater detail. Quote, at the time, there was animosity in the U.S. towards socialism and communism. This caused a lot of problems for social scientists and their supporters, who argued for a science of society which was separate from ideology and politics. Social scientists were also pressed about the social relevance of their work regarding problems such as racism, income inequality, and crime, and threats to democracy. And so Solovey's latest book, Social Science for What? Battles over Public Funding for the Other Sciences at the National Science Foundation, explores the historical mistrust of social science, which he says continues to this day. I agree. I think a lot of people think that social sciences sociology in general is kind of one of those voodoo sciences that where people just kind of woo-woo wave their hands and categorize things, and suddenly it's supposed to be science. But they fail to realize that if you do have the ability to create constructs of how people act, then it is, pretty de facto science. We have the ability to analyze things and glean from the analysis actionable information. You can run tests to see how somebody acts. It is a social science. In fact, you can do searches right now on YouTube about psychology and sociology, where somebody acting a certain way in front of a child will influence that child's behavior. And the same thing goes for adults. Somebody that walks into a room and acts a certain way can influence the room. And the way that people spend money and the way that people are influenced by one thing or another it's all sociological forces to some degree. So I definitely think that there's a lot of people that think that it's just hand waving, but it's far from it. The next article is over in the Wanted channel. Google and Ifixit team up to offer pixel parts online. There's the link. It still says that I have an unstable connection. I'm going to stop my music. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to keep on recording locally. The next, it keeps disconnecting. Okay, well, anyway, this next article is over at Wanted, and it says here, Ifixit has signed a deal with Google to make pixel repairs much easier. Ifixit.com will sell genuine Google parts individually and in kits later this year. Both companies published blog posts about the collaboration. Google says the parts will be offered for the Pixel 2 through the Pixel 6 Pro. And we'll click that link and take you over to Ars Technica. The article was written by Ron Amadeo. I think that I'm going to have to just do this recording, and it's not going to stream. It's actually marking me as offline. So I'm going to continue on and just go from here. The next article is over in the Wanted channel, and it says here, Duckduckgo announces a new privacy-focused Mac web browser. Among other features, Duckduckgo says that its browser will automatically manage cookie consent pop-ups on many sites, that it will use encrypted HTTPS connections whenever they're available, and that the browser will block trackers and allow you to clear stored website data on a site-by-site basis. So we'll follow this link. It'll take us over to Ars Technica. Andrew Cunningham is the author of this article, and it says WebKit browser includes ad blocking, password manager, but no extension support. Well, that allows you to kind of stop the ability to expand its feature set. And as you prevent feature creep, you also lock down the security of the application more. And I think I'm just going to continue on. The next article is in the Word and Tech. No Man's Sky has a new free update that turns you into a space outlaw. It says Hello Games has released yet another large free update to No Man's Sky. This one's called Outlaws, and it delivers a set of missions where the player can acquire black market tech and other essential goods from other ships in a less than savory manner, and then smuggle it for a profit. There are also bounty missions and planetary raids. There will be high conflict zones in the areas where outlaws have captured space stations, where you'll have plenty of chances to engage in dogfights. Oh, and there are now capes and hoods that you can unlock. Well, Edna Mose says no capes. Anyway, this is over at The Verge. The article's at The Verge, and it's written by Cameron Faulkner. Head over to The Verge, and you can read it there. Because of this glitchiness over on... because of this glitchiness over on Twitch, I'm just going to try and plow through this because I don't know what is actually happening. Over in the Warcrafter channel, the article is titled, "There's huge potential for this unbreakable open source BIOS. Now it's running on modern..." Oops. Pardon me 1 second. Let me refresh this. Okay, so this next article is over in the Warcrafters channel. It says there's huge potential for this unbreakable open source BIOS. Now it's running on modern Intel PCs. An open source Linux consulting company called 3MDEB, I'm not sure if there's a better way of saying that, has successfully loaded an open source BIOS called Coreboot and a firmware distribution framework of its own creation called Dashero onto a modern Intel Alder Lake Z690 motherboard from MSI. It's done so in the hope of offering even greater control over the fundamental PC software to the end user with open source BIOS software. I'm always worried about these fundamental aspects of a computer having the ability to be modified. In certain ways I like it, in other ways I don't. I just feel like it becomes ripe for somebody not disclosing a security issue and then being able to exploit it. Because code is only as good as the developers that are developing it. And take it from me, if you've never had to deal with a security breach, it is a nightmare. Again, take it from me, it's not if it'll happen, it's when it'll happen. And when the BIOS itself can be modified, I get a little worried. That said, I'd probably noodle around with this to see what it's capable of. So this article's over at PC Gamer, and it's written by Jacob Ridley. Again, because of the issues that I'm having, I'm not going to go through this article too much. I'm just going to have to call it a night because something weird is happening. This here says the motherboard's BIOS is often seen as sacrosanct in how it offers low-level control over a gaming PC. However, turns out that it's not actually true, according to the article. And your motherboard's BIOS is just as open to fiddling with as any other PC part if you're brave enough. And there you go. You can go over to PC Gamer and read the rest of this article. And finally, the last article for the night is this one here. Yeah, anybody that was in my chat was actually booted out because I disconnected, but I was actually getting streams from other places, so I'm not quite sure what was going on with my ingest into Twitch. This here says in the Daily News Show, JP Morgan Chase said its first quarter profits dropped by 42% from last year. The title of this article is JP Morgan profits drop 42%, bank writes off Russian assets. JP Morgan Chase said its first quarter profits dropped 42% from last year, partly because the bank had to write down nearly $1.5 billion in assets due to higher inflation and the Russian-Ukrainian war. Let's click the link and it'll take us over to ABC News. And it's an interesting thing. So this article is over at ABC News, and it's written by Ken Sweet, who's an AP business writer. And it mentions inflation, and I have yet to be told what the mechanism of this massive increase in inflation is caused by. I have mentioned this again and again and again in my streams now, and nobody can say it to me. A couple of people have hinted at, it's a death by 1,000 cuts, but I just don't see it that way. There is a fundamental mechanism that's causing inflation, and the only thing that I can think of, the only thing that I have been able to trace inflation to is the cost of fuel. And I would love to have somebody talk to me more about it from their perspective of what it is, what fired off this inflation, because we've been dealing with a lot of money, and people supposedly not being able to buy. So why, after 2.5 years, are we suddenly having to deal with inflation? It's just troubling to me. But at the end of the day, ohmTown Daily News is going to continue to go through its aggregation, and I will grab a sample of articles, and then I will do another episode of this. And I am going to move the show from the 6 o'clock window to 11 p.m. Eastern for the duration. From now on, it'll be at 11 o'clock until midnight-ish. But because of whatever is going on right now between my connection and Twitch, tonight I'm just going to stop. And thank you for listening to the podcast or watching the video on YouTube or watching here on Twitch. I will be here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. And hopefully this will be received as a more advantageous time for people to come and hang out. 6 o'clock is a particularly busy time. So I'll see you tomorrow, 11 p.m. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.